Gary Green is the author of several Northlight books, including Creating Textures in Colored Pencil, Creating Radiant Flowers in Colored Pencil, and several artist photo reference books. His colored pencil paintings and articles have appeared in various other books and magazines, including International Artist, The Artist Magazine, American Artist, and the Encyclopedia of Colored Pencil Techniques from Quarto. He also produced several art instruction videos, including Colored Pencil Video Workshop, Water Soluble Video Workshop, and the Artist's Guide to Reference and Photography. Gary's paintings have won national and international awards, including the Collier Western Art League National Art Merit Competition, the Artist Magazine National Art Competitions, and 2 Colored Pencil Society of America Awards of Excellence. His work has been purchased and showcased by corporations in the U.S. and abroad.
Now, the most important thing before you start your painting, of course, is to select a subject. And because colored pencil takes a long time, and you usually don't work from live subjects, so you need good reference photography. And it's usually a good idea to use your own reference photos, but it is important for your photo to have good detail, to be able to see everything, in order for you to make the decisions on what to put in your painting and what not to put in your painting. All right, I like to take some tracing paper. This speeds up the process a little bit. And I'm going to take some removable tape and make sure you attach it pretty good so it doesn't move around on you. And then take a very thin pencil you can just trace the outlines of your subject. Sometimes you might need a light table to see things. This one's fairly easy. And draw your lines nice and dark like this. Okay, and I'm going to finish up my tracing here. Okay, well, let's take this off now. And here we have our tracing. And now we're going to do the next step in our layout. And we're going to take our tracing and put it on the material that we're going to be, the surface that we're going to be using. And we're going to be using Bristol Vellum regular surface. Now, the paper Bristol Vellum comes in a couple of different surfaces. There's the regular surface, which is has a tooth to it, and you need a tooth with to work with colored pencil. And there's a plate surface, and the plate surface is very smooth. And unless you're a real expert colored pencil kind of person, I suggest that you use a regular surface. And that has the nice tooth to it. Okay, so we have our tracing here. Now the next step is I'm going to get some graphite paper, and that's this right here, and it's coated with graphite on one side. That's why they call it graphite paper. And you put it underneath like this, and make sure that this is attached firmly to it. And then you take another Verathin pencil and try to get one a different color. That way you'll see if you've left off any lines, because you can't see what you're doing underneath because this is dark. So you want to make sure you have all the lines down. So you use one of a different color, and then you just go over the lines that you've already drawn with a different color. And that way you'll see what you have and what you have not. There you go. Okay, well, I'm going to finishing this up here. I might mention that when you're doing your tracing, now I'm doing it kind of hard here so you folks can see it, but when you're doing your tracing and using the graphite paper, make sure you don't use too much pressure, because what will happen is that you'll cut a groove in the paper. The paper is kind of spongy, and what you'll do is you'll put grooves in it, and they might be kind of hard to hide when you're doing your painting. So be aware of that. And at the same time, you want to put enough pressure on so that your subject does transfer. So it takes a little bit of practice, but if you haven't done it already, you'll be able to do it. So let's see what we have here. I'm going to remove this and our graphite paper, and well, there it is. Well, there it is in graphite. Okay. Now, if you're doing just sketching it out, this is pretty much what you'd have too. Maybe a few more erasures. That's another reason why I do the tracing, so I don't have to erase quite as much and alter the surface of the paper. Okay, now that we have our graphite layout, now what we have to do is, and this can be kind of confusing, especially if you're doing colored pencil for the first time or not used to working with a medium. We have to do the colored pencil layout. We don't want to leave the graphite on the paper because, and again, this ties back into colored pencil being translucent. You put colored pencil on top of this, and I don't care what color you use. You can use black on top of it, and that graphite is going to show through. And so you don't want that to happen, so we have to remove the graphite before we start any coloring. So the thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my kneaded eraser, and this is something that a kneaded eraser is good for, is I'm going to lift up like this. I'm not going to erase if I can possibly avoid it, and lighten up this graphite as much as I can. And then when you've lightened the graphite up, you come back with a colored pencil, and you use a color obviously that that corresponds with the area that you're going to be working on. Now, obviously, I'm not going to use a blue pencil on this because this thing is kind of a reddish color, and I'm going to use a Verathin pencil. Now, I can't tell you specifically what colors Verathin to use, because there's 132 colors in let's say the Prismacolor line, and only 36 Verathins. So you got to kind of match whatever color comes closest to do your outlines, and I usually try to use a color that is closest to, but is lighter than whatever area it is that you're working on. So in this case, I'm using a Carmine Red Verathin, and I'm going to come back and I'm right next to the graphite line, I'm going to draw colored pencil line. Now, you can go inside or outside the line, it doesn't really matter. And even if you go over it, it's okay. And the reason why you don't want to go over the graphite line with the colored pencil, or as little as possible, let's put it that way, it can't be completely avoided, is that because colored pencil cannot be completely erased, if you put the colored pencil line over the graphite line, when you try to erase the graphite, which eventually we're going to do, the graphite will be trapped underneath the colored pencil. So you'll have to either erase a little bit harder, or you know, it'll still the graphite will still remain on the paper. So that's why we're putting the colored pencil line right up to the graphite line. And like I said, if you go over it a little bit, you know, you're not going to turn to stone or anything like that. It's just going to make it a lot easier to do your layout. I just did this little bit here so you can see, and now you know, as I go along, I'm going to come back again with my kneaded eraser, and I'm going to erase this time, and I'm going to erase the graphite lines. And some of your colored pencil will erase too, but it's because it can't be completely erased, you'll still be able to see it. And I'm going to go back and get those colored pencil lines a little bit so you can see them, but you don't want them quite as dark as this. You want them as light as possible, because you want them to disappear when you do your painting. You don't want to see those outlines. So you've erased the graphite lines, and now you have just the colored pencil lines to work from. Now, invariably I'll get the question, people will say, well, why didn't you just lay it out in colored pencil to begin with? Well, the reason why I didn't is because if you put down colored pencil to start with your layout, and let's say you make a mistake, well, because colored pencil can't be completely removed, and you try to erase it, that line will stay where it is. Let's say for example, I wanted to change this and make this area right here yellow. Well, if I did that, even though I erased that red line I put there, it still would show through, especially a lighter color like yellow. And I probably have to start my layout over again. So that's the reason why we do these layouts this way. Okay, well, we mentioned that this is going to be a demonstration with underpainting with a solvent, and I chose, and I usually prefer for this type of thing, Bestine, and what it is rubber cement thinner, and I would use, for this particular result, I would, if possible, use the Bestine rubber cement thinner. I've used some other kind, and they work differently, let's put it that way. So I don't own stock in the Bestine company, by the way, so I'm not trying to do that. Now, you can use different solvents for different effects, and I use the Bestine because it gives a nice even kind of finish to what I'm doing. In my other DVD, we do a underpainting with water soluble, and that gives an uneven kind of splotchy look, and that's more for kind of rough textures and that sort of thing. But I'm using Bestine here. You can also use, some people use terpenoid or turpentine. You can use rubbing alcohol. You can use gin. You can use vodka. You can use rocket fuel, lighter fluid. There's a lot of different, as long as it's clear, it'll work. And any solvent that you use with the colored pencil will have a different effect. So try some of those out and experiment. But this particular method gives a real smooth look to it. And you can apply the Bestine. What I use, and what I'm going to use in this case, is I'm going to use cotton-tipped applicators like this. And these, with the wooden handles, work better than the kind you get at your local drugstore. These are, the buds here are much firmer, and the long handle on these, the wooden stick, keeps the material from getting on your fingers, and you don't necessarily want to do that. It doesn't hurt, and it really won't hurt you. I've been using it a long time, and I'm still here to do this video, so it isn't really that harmful. So, but I do like to use these kind of applicators. The Bestine also can be applied with a brush, and make sure that the brush that you use is not one of your $200 sable brushes. Use an inexpensive brush, the most inexpensive one that you can find, because eventually the Bestine is going to affect the brush and mess it up. So use an inexpensive brush if you're using a brush to apply the solvent. Okay, now let's start our underpainting, and I'm going to start out with a sharpened pencil, and I'm going to keep this little tissue under my hand to keep from putting any oils from my hand on the paper, and I'm just going to start covering this thing. Now, I'm going to put all my strokes in the same direction, but I'm not necessarily going to follow the contours of the rows here, because, well, you'll see when I put the Bestine on it that it really all kind of blends together. And you just cover this whole thing. Okay, now I'm finishing up my underpainting here. I'm using canary yellow. You can use more than one color if it's necessary, but this one only requires the one color. Now eventually this color is going to be part of the painting, and it's going to be the highlights. And what I'm actually doing with this underpainting is staining the paper, so we're not using bare paper, and it's going to give an entirely different look. If you look at your reference photo, there's kind of a golden glow to this, to the petals on this flower. And the reason why I'm underpainting it first instead of using yellow as the last step, this canary yellow as the last step, is because if I have all this red down, you notice that in the reference photo that there's kind of a grainy kind of look to the petals. It's, the pollen naturally on the petals. And if I try to put yellow on top of all that, what's going to happen is that it's going to ruin the grainy effect. It's just going to kind of move that color around. So that's why I'm underpainting it first, and then just put the red on top of it and the other colors. Okay, we're ready to apply the Bestine to our canary yellow underpainting. And I poured off a little bit in this bottle, this tiny bottle, and try to find a bottle similar in size to this. That's because you really don't even need this much. You need just a little bit. And always have a bottle that has a cap that will screw on tight. And when you're working, you take the cap and open it up. You put your cotton swab in the material, and I'll show you that in a minute here, and you put it on. But while you're working, keep the cap you don't have to screw it down, but just put the cap on top of the bottle like this, and this will keep some of the vapors from escaping. Not that, you know, it's going to knock you out or smell real bad or anything, but it's just to have it there and not be inhaling the vapors, you know, because you're sitting fairly close to it. So just keep it capped like that, and that'll be fine. Another thing too is that once you apply the color, and this Bestine dries real quickly. It evaporates very fast, and your cotton swab will dry out real quick. And when it dries out, you don't dip the cotton swab back into the Bestine because it'll contaminate it. What happens is the Bestine won't turn yellow, for example, but what will happen eventually, there'll be little particulates of the colored pencil material that'll lay down on the bottom of the container, and then when you go to stick your cotton swab in subsequent applications, the cotton swab will pick up some of these particulates, and if they happen to be not of the same color and not match or something like that, you'll just smear these other colors on, which not a good thing, because remember, colored pencil cannot be completely erased. So let's get started with this. And I'm going to just load up my cotton swab and just kind of slosh it on. Now this is dry, and just throw that away and dip it in again. And another thing I like about the Bestine, it doesn't leave a mark like oil, you know, will leave some residue, and other materials, or rather turpentine that you use with, say, with oils. Okay, just put that on, and you just keep doing that. You can see how quickly this stuff dries, which is a definite advantage. It dries up real quick. You just kind of blend it in. You can see how it blends real nicely. Okay, we're ready to start layering our painting. Now you'll remember that we talked about how we apply the colors, and we start out with the lightest area and we start out with the darkest values. Okay, so the lightest part of this rose is the yellow part, at least the way I look at it anyway, and the darkest values are right in here, as you can see. So that's where we're going to start out, and I'm going to start out with dark umber, and remember about following the contours. Now this isn't really a contour here, but we're still going to use it anyway. And I'm going to just use a linear stroke, and I'm just going to stroke this on as lightly as possible. And with our dark umber. And then the next lightest color, we're going to use Tuscan red, and we're going to layer that right on top. Now remember that when we give a sequence of colors, it doesn't necessarily mean all the colors go in the same spot like we're doing here. Sometimes we might leave off a color or add a color here or there. But in this case, all the colors are going in the same spot, this area right here. And now the lightest color in this sequence is raspberry. And I'm putting that in right now. All right, and then we're going to complete this other area. Again, we're going to start out First, getting our point good and sharp like that. And we're going to put in dark umber. Make sure we have all the area covered. Don't have any big gaps. And we're just going to do a little of this for you to see. And Tuscan red. Now this little strip right here is a little bit lighter than the one with the dark umber, so we're just going to put Tuscan red here and not put the dark umber in this particular area right here. This is what I mean by not all the colors going in the same spot. And then I'm going to put raspberry on there. Put a raspberry on top. One of the great things about colored pencil is the fact that you have total control over hues and values and that sort of thing. But it's up to you to see these things. Now in the reference photo, I'm going to work on this little area right in here, this shadow that this petal is casting. And you'll notice that it starts out a little bit darker over here and gets a little bit lighter. And then along the edge, it's kind of kind of an orange hue. And you notice that a lot of these shadows are different. And also take a look at the area we just finished now. Here there's very subtle darks and lights, or actually values that are a little bit lighter than the darkest value. And I kind of brought them up a little bit here. I made them a little bit lighter so you can see them. And you can improvise like this as you go along. So we're going to do this little area here, and so you can see how the colors are applied. Now I'm going to start out with a burnt ochre. Now this is put this over tissue here so I can protect what I've already got down, and I'm going to add the there we go. And you'll notice, like I said, this is a little bit darker here, so I'm going to start out with this burnt ochre. Now the contour of this particular petal goes this way, so that's the way I'm going to be putting on all the color. And I'm just going to put that on there, and you notice I'm using a linear stroke. And I'm putting a little bit more on here because it's a little more intense. And you can move the paper around while you're working too to get in the right spot. And as I get further down on this thing, you'll notice, if you look at the reference, that it gets a little bit lighter. So I'm going to just, in this case, I'm going to apply a little bit less pencil. go. Add some more. All right, now this is kind of like what you see here. Now I'm going to come back with the second color, which is, this is a Faber-Castell Polychromos pencil. This is an oil-based colored pencil, and as I said earlier, you can mix the oil-based colored pencils with the wax-based pencils. Really doesn't matter. I chose this particular color because, well, I was using Prismacolors. They don't have a color that quite matches this, so I'm going to use this color, and I'm going to use my Prismacolor, my Faber-Castell Terracotta. Got to keep your pencil sharp, folks. And just keep applying that. Okay, now you can see here where it starts out darker, just like in the reference photo. It gets a little bit lighter. Okay. And now I'm going to take some orange, and this is, again, we're going to go back to using the Prismacolors, and just lightly put a little bit of orange only on this part here, on the edge, and then maybe go back a little bit further in here. Okay, now you can see, now we've made it a little more pronounced, the value change, which is okay. The photograph, your reference photo, it's okay to disagree with it and emphasize some things a little bit more or play down some things, and it'll work better for your painting. Now you can come back and adjust some of these values. I'm going to put a little more terracotta back over to adjust these colors. And I'm going to even get some of this dark color. Now I can get away with this because the color isn't, this burnt ochre isn't really quite as intense as, say, you know, Tuscan red or something like that, so I can put a little more on there. Okay, now you can finish up doing the rest of it and the same thing, but you have to look at your reference photo and say, okay, what colors do I see here? And then reproduce them on your painting. Okay, while I'm finishing up my layering here, you can see the areas that I've covered so far. I've finished layering my mid values, I should say, and dark values. And if you take a look at this, you can see that I don't have these three particular colors in any one given spot necessarily. There's some where there's all three colors, there's some where there's not. Obviously this one, this shadow looks a little bit different, say, than this one. So because this takes a while to do, you're going to have to figure out, you know, the process, because if I sat and did each little operation, this video would be a mini series and not a, you know, a 1 hour video or whatever it is. So you'll have to, and this helps you to understand the medium well as well. So let's start out now with the lightest values of these yellow portion of the petals, and I'm going to put a little bit of this. This is yellowed orange Prismacolor, and I'm going to apply that. I've got to make sure my point's good and sharp, and I'm going to apply the yellowed orange. And as it gets towards the underpainting, I'm just going to kind of fade it out. And your underpainting is going to be the lightest part of these yellow petals. And this comes around like this. Now you'll notice here that there's there's not a smooth transition between these two, so you can come back and adjust things like this. I'm coming back with a terracotta and kind of making that transition a little bit smoother. By adding that. Okay, we've completed our pure yellow area of the petals, and you'll notice here that what we're doing is actually letting the underpainting be the lightest part of the petals. Now I realize that this is our painting is a little bit darker than the photo, but I wanted to jump out a little bit more, and that's why I made it a little bit darker. And I don't like to necessarily copy photos exactly the way they are. I like to put my own interpretation either of color or change some of the shapes and so on and so forth. So we'll leave that up to you creative people to do. So here we have the purely yellow portions of the petals done, and now we're ready to do the red petals. Now most of these petals are pretty similar in the colors that we're going to use, but they do vary from petal to petal here and there. So I'm going to work on one little area right about over here, and what I've done is enlarge that area so you can get a good idea of how basically the colors go on. And then once you see that, and then you can look at your reference photo and decide, well, I want to add a little bit of this or use a little bit of less of that, and make your decisions on what to use there. So let's take a look at our close-up, our detail view of the petals. Just a little area right here. And I've blown this up, and this is what it looks like. I haven't done anything to it yet, so you know what we're going to start out with. And then what I'm going to do is come back with my electric eraser and do a little erasing. If you take a look at this petal, for example, you'll notice that this is a little bit lighter over here, and it's not a highlight exactly, but it is lighter than a lighter value than the rest of the petal. So what I'm doing is getting my electric eraser, and I'm going to erase a little bit of that underpainting and leave a little bit of the paper showing through. Now remember, you can't completely erase colored pencil, so their colored pencil will remain on that. So let's take a little bit of that and start erasing. Now, I wouldn't attempt this with a, you can attempt it, I should say, with a kneaded eraser, but you just have to kind of tap it like, and it'll take a little bit longer. Okay, now we're going to remember that we do the darkest value first, and the darkest value we're working right in here now. This is the area that we're working on now. There's a shadow cast by this petal right here, and there's part of this shadow right here, and so I'm going to come in with Tuscan Red, and we'll do this one here. And this is the way the petal grows, so I'm putting all my strokes in this same general direction. And I'm working a little light touch, linear stroke. Now, if your area doesn't quite match up, if you have darker and lighter in here, like I do, this is a little bit darker, you can come back and make those little adjustments later on. But the first thing is to get the color down. Got to keep your point sharp. Got a couple little gaps in there. I'm just going to fill them right in. Just make sure that you keep the colors fairly consistent. I'm going to go back over this a little bit. If you have too much down, you can always come back with your kneaded eraser and you form a little point to it and come back and just tap it like this, and you can lift off some of the color, lighten it up like that. You can see where it ends up on your kneaded eraser. So you can make those kind of adjustments too while you're working. All right, now we have our Tuscan Red layer down, and now I'm going to come back with Raspberry and go over the Tuscan Red. Okay, I finished these cast shadows here, and I finished with the raspberry. And these two shadows consist of the Tuscan red underneath and raspberry on the top. And this one here is just the raspberry by itself. There's a very subtle difference, but if you look real closely at the reference photo and this too, you can see that this is just a little bit lighter than these two. Well, now we're going to paint the petals themselves, the main body of them. Of course, we're painting them here with the shadow, but we're going to start the main body of those. And we're going to start out with magenta. And we're going to layer that on, and this petal grows this way. And we're going to lightly layer magenta on here. Now, also, keep in mind that we started with the Tuscan red, which is the darkest value, and worked with the raspberry, which is a little lighter. Now magenta is, as you can see, much lighter than those others, and we're getting lighter and lighter as we keep adding color to this. And this is the way we do colored pencil, is work dark to light. And we're just going to put some of this down the middle here. And kind of feather it out. Notice all my strokes are going the same way. And this is the way this particular subject grows. Okay, I'm ready to layer my final color on here, and again I'm working in this little area right here, and you can see that I've covered this whole petal in the background here is this kind of pinkish orangish color, and so now I'm ready to put in my final layer of color, and this is light carmine, and this is another of the Faber-Castell Polychromos pencil, and I'm going to go over the whole thing more or less with that. And again, notice my strokes are all going the same way, and I'm going to go right over everything with this light carmine. I'm also going to go over the spots where I erased, and you'll see that when I put the color down over the areas that I didn't erase, that it will be a slightly darker value. Okay, I'm finishing up here with my light carmine. And if you take a look at your reference photo, you can see that there's some old, very subtle lights and darks here. And you can come back in if you want and just put a little bit more color down for those. And it gives the petals actually just kind of move around a little bit. They're not flat. There's little hills and valleys and depressions in them. So you can come back and put in a little bit more color on one side and then leave it light on another, and that will give the impression of a little bit of shape and form to those petals. You can, matter of fact, you can even come back again with your kneaded eraser and right next to the darks pick up a little bit, and that'll make them make the hills and valleys and depressions a little bit steeper. This one maybe is a little bit too steep, so I'm going to adjust that a little bit. And you can make these little adjustments with colored pencil. It's really wonderful that you just really can't do with any ease with any other medium. And you can get these flowers to look pretty much like you want to put your nose up to them. So that's a really nice thing about it. All right, this is the flower pretty much finished up. And I've put these little numbers on here for a reason. It's kind of a key. And what this is showing you is what colors go where. Now, I couldn't very well sit and do this entire thing and tell you every combination of the colors. It would take too long. And plus, I want you to experiment a little bit, with the medium and see what goes where. And the differences are subtle. They're basically the same colors. Obviously, I'm not using blue in here or anything. I'm trying to trick you. It's just different combinations. So we have a key and a list so you can see approximately what colors go where to finish up your rows. All right, we're almost there. Now we're just going to do our little bit of our background here. Now, instead of laying my paw across this thing, I'm going to just turn this upside down. Don't get too dizzy watching this. And I want to turn this upside down too, and so you can see where I'm working. And I'm going to just do the background. Now we've been using the linear stroke a lot in this particular piece because there's definite contours to it. But this is kind of an out of focus background that we have on this. And so we're going to use a circular stroke. And again, we're going to work dark to light as we usually do, and you can just put this in at random. It doesn't really matter. And we're going to just put our circular strokes in here. And I'm using Cool Gray 70% Prismacolor. And the idea here is to keep it as uneven as possible. You want to really put this stuff in kind of at random. And it doesn't look like much when you're starting out, but after you start adding the colors to them, it starts to take shape, or non-shape in this case. So we're just going to work over here in the corner a little bit. And this is again, the Cool Gray 70%. Now I'm going to switch, and you can just switch right in the middle if you want, because this is very random. And I'm going to use a dark green here. And I'm going to go over the top on some, not on others. Just keeping it kind of loose, or at least as loose as you can get with colored pencil. And after you have these colors down, you can come back and reapply them more on top of another. This is just kind of give you kind of a layout of this. And now I'm using apple green. And you just keep switching back and forth until you have it pretty well covered. Well, that does it. That's how you underpaint with colored pencil. and with solvents, and you can see what the results are. There's a reference photo. Actually, I think my painting here is better than the reference photo. I don't know how yours looks, but I'm sure that it does take a little practice in doing this, and I think that you'll be able to achieve the same results with a little bit of practice, and I hope you enjoyed it. Okay, now we're ready to start our layering process, and we're going to use the wax-based colored pencils now. Put your water-soluble colored pencils away. We're not going to be using those anymore. We just use that for the underpainting, and we're going to start layering the color on, and again we're going to be following the same pattern. Now you can use a piece of tissue paper to lean on while you're working, to keep your greasy paws from getting on the donkey's face. But depending on how large your painting is, you can vary the size of a piece of paper. I've just taken a piece of tissue paper, actually tracing paper, and folded it into 4 pieces and 4 sections rather, and I'm ready to go here. And I'm going to start out, and I'm going to be using Prismacolors here, and we're going to work dark to light, and again we're going to be using linear strokes, and we're going to follow that same pattern. It's also important to remember to, especially when doing this kind of work, to keep your pencil point good and sharp. And you just add a little bit at a time. You can always come back and add same color again. And we're just going to make these little strokes here. You can make some a little bit longer if you want. And now I'm going to take a dark brown Prismacolor. Just stroke it on. And now I have a sienna brown Prismacolor. Now these wax-based Prismacolors wear down really quick on this very toothy watercolor paper, so you're going to maybe even have to sharpen your pencil a little more often. And you just keep all your strokes going the same way, following the contours of the donkey's face or whatever part that you're doing. Now I have an oil-based colored pencil here, only because the color works right for me. I'm using a Faber-Castell Polychromos Burnt Ochre, which just happens to be the same color as the underpainting. And I'm putting those strokes on too. Now the oil-based colored pencils aren't quite as soft as the Prismacolors, so you can get away with putting more strokes on before you need to sharpen your pencil.
To learn this technique, the first thing you have to do is learn how to use your tools. So you want to take your mechanical pencil and make sure you've got that 2B lead in there, and you're going to learn how to blend. Now, I start all my students this way, learning how to go dark to the white of the paper seamlessly. You don't want to see the choppiness, you don't want to see scribble lines, and it looks a lot easier than it really is. This is what most people come up with at first, and no amount of blending is going to blend that mess out and make it look smooth. And smoothness is the key to this technique. So let me demonstrate it for you, because I never tell anybody to do something that I don't show them how to do it first. So we're going to take just your piece of paper, and the first thing is how to hold your pencil. All right? Now, when you're pushing really hard and you want to get this real dark tone, the last thing you want to do is hold your pencil at the side, because you're just going to snap that lead. So to put a lot of pressure on it, you're going to have to hold it kind of perpendicular. And that was a piece of lead breaking in my pencil that fell out, and that's going to happen to you too, so don't freak out. So anyway, you're going to hold it straight up and down, perpendicular, and you're going to push. And you're going to go up and down firmly, and then back and forth at the same time. Now you can see how I'm getting a little bit of the pencil line thing, but just keep going back and forth, and it's that back and forth and up and down process that's going to make that fill in. See how you can't really see the pencil lines anymore? And that is key to this technique. Now, you're going to want to lighten your touch, and you're going to come over to the side here, move over to the right, and you're going to slowly lighten these tones. So we're going dark to light. And it takes practice. If you've not used a mechanical pencil before, it's not going to feel normal. So just give yourself some time, be nice to yourself, and give yourself the proper practice, because practice is everything. Now, as I get lighter, you see I pulled back on the pencil a little bit. That's so I can't put as much pressure on it. And when I'm going lightly, I can put the pencil kind of on its side and relax a little bit. You really do want to relax, because if you try to over control your pencil lines, they end up looking stiff like that. So you just kind of let it flow. Just lighten up a little bit and just let it go back and forth lightly. And just keep going until you lighten up going into the white of the paper. If you see little areas like that, just kind of go fill them in. And just keep going back and forth and up and down until it fades. Okay, now take your time when you're doing this. I know this isn't real interesting, and this part of the process it seems a little elementary, but really part of your practice is going to learn patience, because you have to take your time to make it look good. So when you finally kind of get out to this direction here where it's fading to the white of the paper, just kind of go back, make sure you like what you see, and then stop. And that's where these tortillons are going to come into play. Okay? Now, these you're going to hold at an angle. You don't want to use the tip, because if you use the tip, they are spiral wound, and they're going to end up like this if you use the tip too much, and they're going to flatten out. And I can always tell when one of my students has been pushing too hard and using the tip, because I go over and they've got a whole bunch of these that look like this. Now, it's not ruined if it's like this, and I'm going to give you a little trick right here. Just take a paper clip and kind of straighten it out a little bit, and this is going to become your tortilla rescue kit. Every house should have one. But when they get blunt, you can just take this and repair your tortillon. The only time you want to throw these away is if they unravel, like the one that I pitched, or if the tip is like bending over and everything and you can't use it anymore, okay? So you're going to take a tortillon, preferably a clean one at this juncture, and you're going to hold it at an angle. If you hold it too flat, these little ridges are going to leave marks in your paper, and if you hold it too blunt, it's going to get blunt. So we're just going to start right where we began, and that's in the dark, and we're going to use the same process. We're going to go up and down and back and forth, and this tortillon is going to take that graphite and smooth it out and make it real polished looking. And it also helps fill in and get rid of your pencil lines, and you're just going to go very slow, just like what I'm doing right here. Now, I used to think if I pushed really hard, I was going to get a better blend. And I used to just overblend everything, thinking, you know, the harder I pushed, the more that graphite was going to behave. And I was so wrong. Actually, all I was doing, and of course it took me years to figure this out, so, you know, learn from me, do what I say, not what I do. Use a very light touch, because that keeps the graphite on the outside surface of the paper, because if you use a lot of pressure like I used to, you're embedding it and you're roughing up the paper, and that graphite's not going to go anywhere. And I could not figure out why I had little blotches. Why couldn't I get it smooth? And it's because the harder I pressed, the more I was rubbing it into the paper. It took me a long time to figure that out. So learn at the beginning to go very lightly.